Hi, I'm Chip Hardwick. I am the Synod Exec for the Synod of the Covenant, and I want to welcome you, those of you here live on Zoom, and then everyone who will be watching this later. I want to welcome you to this workshop. It's not just Sundays with the Reverend Dr. Javon Caldwell Gross. We're so glad, Javon, that you're here to lead us. I want to make just a couple of brief announcements before turning it over to him. So I'm going to share my screen and I'll go through these fairly quickly because I feel like I'm making them over and over again, sometimes to the same people. So I'm going to try to go through them quickly, but want to draw them to your attention. We have our Matthew 25 grants. The applications are due at the end of the month. So I'd encourage you to take advantage of those if you want to apply for a grant of up to $5,000 towards one of the Matthew 25 goals. Of course, we're here for It's Not Just Sundays. I'll introduce Javon more in just a minute. We've got our monthly preaching workshops that I'll lead the one in October, and then Luke Powery from Duke University will lead the one in November. We'll take a break in December. There's a Zoom Resilience and Renewal Retreat on October 13th that's offered by the Presbyterian Disaster Assistance Program just for us in this synod. We've thought about it as a way to get prepped for the holiday season and get our bearings before we go into another busy season of the church year. We very rarely have any in-person events, but we do have one on October 21st at the Maumee Bay State Resort in Ohio. It's about 20 minutes east of Toledo. Lorenzo Lebrija is the leader of a group that they call the Tri-Tank, rather than a think tank. And his goal is to help us learn how to try and take risks in ministry and think about innovation differently. And that's from 10 to 3:30 at that state park. You can come, make a day of it. We'll give you a free lunch, and then you can take advantage of the beautiful park afterwards or before as well. We'll also have a virtual option for that. We're still pursuing exactly how we'll do that. But if you register for the event asking about the virtual option, we will let you know about it. Let's see, I don't want to play this video for you. We've got a workshop on leading in divided times towards the end of October. And we will be offering a Christmas Day service. And if you'd like to be a part of that, let me know, either in planning or in the execution of it. I'm so delighted I'm getting emails every day with people saying they'd like to help plan or help offer it. This will be a virtual service to give our worship service leaders, a week off the day of Christmas Day. Pastors, tech leaders, musicians, everyone involved in worship. We also have hired an organizer for the Synod of Communities of Color, Reverend Lindsay Anderson. She'll be reaching out to people throughout our synod, particularly members of communities of color, to talk to them about how the synod can learn from them, how the synod can support them, see if there are common dreams and goals throughout the synod. Lindsay is a mixed race Black woman who has a lot of experience in community organizing and really is going to be great at this. Here's the information. I'll put it in the chat. If you don't get our newsletter, that's the best way to find out about all of our ministry. It just comes out once a month. And here's my contact information. Again, I'll put it in the chat. If you want to get in touch with me, any way I can support you or your church, I'd be glad to do that. Again, we're so glad to have Dr. Javon Caldwell Gross here. And those of you who were here last week learned what a great pedagogue he is and how much experience he has. And you also learned of my friendship with him. Javon was a student in one of the preaching classes that I taught at Princeton Seminary, and I am so grateful for our continued friendship. And Javon, I really admire you a lot, and I'm so thankful for this. Javon has been working in ministry for over a decade in a variety of contexts. He serves right now in one of the largest United Methodist churches in the country, St. Luke's United Methodist Church in Indianapolis, where he's the teaching pastor. He's also served at very tiny churches and at middle-sized churches. He'll tell you about that along the way. He is working to establish St. Luke's first online campus and transition into the role of online campus pastor. He has written with his wife The Big Picture and also contributed to the book I'm Black, I'm Christian, and I'm Methodist. So Javon, welcome. We're so glad that you're here.
Chip, thank you so much. Again, it's an honor being with you all, and just really talking about the new landscape of ministry and how we can best live out our mission and vision as a people of God, regardless of where you are located and regardless of what size church you have. I firmly believe that whatever church that we're in is God's answer to that particular community. And so I'm just excited that we're here. I'm originally from Detroit, Michigan. So those of you who are from Michigan and name some of those cities, I know most of them, but sometimes Michigan has cities just about everywhere. And so, but it's good to be back. Chip, and thank you again so much for the invitation to be with you all. I want to thank you all for just being present, and I want to give a warning for those of you who were here last week. This is a 3-part series, but I know we have different, at least especially on this week, we have some people who was not necessarily here on the first week. So I may spend about 15 to 20 minutes at a high level overview of some of the things that we covered the first time. I invite you to stick around. You may pick up something new this time, or you may just have a question that you didn't ask last time. And so for those of you who hear the first time, just bear with me. But I want to make sure that we at least give an overview so that, again, the people who are just joining us, we can all sort of catch up on the same page. Is that okay? Can I have your grace to do that? All right, thank you. So I'm also going to invite you, as we go on, this will also be sort of a workshop, because I firmly believe that some of the learnings that we're able to do is really our shared learning. And when I've done this before, I've been really amazed and really encouraged of how people get ideas from each other. Something as simple as, hey, tell us some things that you all are doing with online ministry. And then people just go into the chat, and then people are amazed at what other churches are doing. And I've even had churches who started to partner together or who become a resource for each other. They live in the same community, or they just realized, hey, you're in this part of the country and I'm in this part of the country, but we serve similar congregations. Let's see if we can do some things together. So there's some great shared possibilities that will be present, but we will be doing some work together. So listen, let me just start off with a word of prayer, and then I tell you how we got into Not Just Sundays at a very high level, and then we will move to some very practical things about this new landscape of ministry and how there are some potential and possibilities of growing our church during these times as well. So let's open in a word of prayer. God, I'm grateful for who you are, grateful for who you have been in the lives of each church represented, grateful for each leader that you brought here tonight. Man, not just for the sake of gaining information, but number one, drawing closer to you. I think anytime that we talk about ministry or strategies, it opens our minds and imaginations to knowing you better, to knowing you in different ways. And so I pray that maybe if it's just a seed or maybe another idea, that it allows us to see you in just a different light. And so I pray that even as we open up our minds and imaginations to you, we do the same thing to the people that you've called us to serve. That there may be new families and new possibilities and potential to reach people in our very own community and even beyond. And so I pray that you would guide our time together, that you would bless every leader, not for the sake of themselves, but for the people and community that you've called them to serve. Christ, this is our prayer. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
So I'm going to share my screen in just a minute. But I've been doing these seminars and workshops called It's Not Just Sundays because of a journey I started at St. Luke's probably 2 years ago. And it's been sort of my own personal journey of learning how to do ministry in a new landscape because the realities I share with some of you the first time, none of us are experts in how to do ministry today. And in fact, if you meet somebody that says they are an expert, run the other way really fast because they don't know what they're talking about. As Dr. Hardwick can attest, we were not trained to do ministry during a global pandemic. Princeton is a phenomenal place, but there were very few seminaries that had classes on, when the world shuts down, here's what you do. There were no classes on that. And so we had to sort of learn, we had to learn as we go. And so in my own learning and my own journey, there were just some things that, man, I just kept seeing within our church and churches in our community and across the nation. And the Lord just really put it on my heart to share this with as many churches as possible. And so I want to kind of just share that journey with you. Again, those of you who were here for the first time, just act like you didn't hear. And if you have some follow-up questions, I would love to just take some time before we transition to take those questions. So then I'm going to share my screen. All right. Can you all see my screen? All right. So we titled this Not Just Sundays. And in a nutshell, is really looking at how we live out our ministry beyond Sunday morning. And because we lived in a time where we had to do ministry in a global pandemic with everything being shut down, it dramatically altered the landscape of ministry that we serve. It dramatically altered the rhythms of the people who we are trying to reach, and dramatically altered the people who are in our local congregations. And so it's really thinking strategically about how do we keep people engaged and about how we reach new people outside of Sunday morning. So to give you a little bit of background, again, I'll try to go through this high level. If you got some further conversations, we can kind of go through that as we go throughout. But like Chip said, my current role at St. Luke's is the teaching and online campus pastor. So I'm technically the second preacher on staff. Before COVID, we had we had 5 services on a Sunday morning, and some of those ran concurrently. So while our lead pastor was in one service, I would be in the other service preaching. And so I looked at it one year, and I preached over 30 times. And so while I wasn't necessarily the lead pastor, it felt like it in terms of just the amount of preaching I was doing per year. But I think part of my role changed after COVID because as we have gone back to in-person worship, we're still only seeing about 50% of the people in worship. And we still have around 1,600 people that we see online per Sunday. And I know that, for some that might be a lot, but my first church, there were 27 people when I showed up. My second church, there were about 67 people when I showed up on that first Sunday. And so I've just had a variety of experiences in terms of different sizes. So as we talk about this idea of how do we strategically plan for church engagement and church growth outside of Sunday morning, I'm not just speaking through the lens of, a 6,000 member congregation, but I'm speaking from it from a lens of a church that has as few as 27 people in it, or a mid-sized congregation, and even larger ones as well. And I tell you that some of these, the regardless of the size, churches go through the same things. So part of the teams I supervise is our social media, our communications team, our videographers, our bloggers. So all of that are teams that I'm currently supervising. And we are in the process of launching a second campus that's south from us. And we're looking for that to only have about 200 people in attendance. So as we go throughout, I want you to look at 3 major questions. And on our session next week, I'm going to ask you to share some of these things, and you're going to see how it relates to our approach to ministry in a hybrid context. So as I told the group last week, and maybe they bought into it, I don't know, but I would say behind our approach to using technology as a tool for ministry, I always encourage leaders, pastors, and congregations that before they start talking about technology as a tool, to really build a strong theological foundation of their approach to ministry in this new landscape. Because sometimes it's not as though we disagree about the use of technology, but the underlying issue is really our theological approach to ministry. So there are three major questions that I would ask you to think about. Number one, what do you believe about God? Number two, what do you believe about yourself and your capacity for change? And what do you inherently believe? What do you inherently believe about community and the purpose of the church? How do you define the church? What is the goal, the purpose of the church? Why did God, when Jesus leaves and ascends, and he sends the disciples out, right? What's the role of the church today? And again, won't go through this too much in detail. Just giving honor to the people who were here last week. But I think those three fundamental questions, and again, some of you might disagree, but I've talked to enough churches that when we start getting down to questions about what do you believe about God, something as simple as, do you believe, or do you believe that church is a building? People say, well, absolutely not. Churches, what we do out in the community, what we do out in the world. I'll say, okay, so if church is not just the building, how do we now use technology as it relates to ministry? Because most people who disagree with technology or disagree with the use or the investment or the emphasis, once we get down to the theological foundation, so helping churches to redefine or articulate what they believe about God, what they believe about their capacity for change, and what do they inherently believe about the community and their purpose of the church. If you get congregations to articulate that, that's how you approach technology and the use of it. So let me just go through for a few minutes of how we got here to it's not just Sundays. Because in the year of 2020, we set a goal of reaching 2,020 people as first-time guests. We were contracted with a consultant, and they said that in order to grow a congregation, the litmus test they use, and you can write this down, I don't know if I shared this with you last time, but the litmus test they use, and they said your number of first-time guests per year has to match the average number of people that you have, average number of adults that you have in worship. Does that make sense? So if I'm looking for a statistic, or if I'm looking for a data point to see how effective am I at growing the congregation, you have to have new people, right? So it's not just about keeping the ones we have, but it's about reaching new people. And their standard for a congregation with metrics, with data, they're saying you need to have the same number as first-time guests as you do the average number of adults that you have in worship. So let's say if you have 30 adults in worship, then you need to at least average 30 new first-time guests a year in worship. And so they gave us a data point, and we'll see how later how kind of COVID will shift some of our metrics. So we realized that most of our first-time guests the year of 2020 came outside of Sunday morning. I mean, we had 1,600 guests outside of Sunday morning during the time of a global pandemic, and that was the time that we saw most of our growth. Now, here's what was challenging about that is for most of you, like we were, our congregation is geared by what happens on Sunday morning. We have our choirs, we have our ushers, our praise team, and all geared towards one day of the week. But then we realized that in the midst of going through COVID, that most of our growth came outside of Sunday morning. And here's what really challenged us, that we had a strategy for what happened on Sunday. We had resources geared towards Sunday, and we were pushing people towards Sunday, but we were not geared strategically to have that same investment to reaching new people and connecting with our current congregation. We didn't have that same strategy Monday through Saturday. And so we started thinking about, what would it look like for us to have a strategy to reach people outside of Sunday morning? But a part of that strategy was that now we had to have a hybrid method. We had to have a hybrid method of how we reached people outside of Sunday morning. So let me just ask you your first question. For most of you, would you say that Sunday morning is sort of your big day or your Super Bowl of the week? So let me
Yeah.
just take a quick poll for how many of you would say that Sunday is your day?
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Looking at hands. Great. Had to scroll through. So right. So most of us, Sunday is the day. But what would it look like for us to now start thinking strategically outside of Sunday morning? And again, I won't go through all of it, but I just want to hit a couple high points in here, Chip, and then we'll sort of move on with our presentation. Because the Sunday morning now, if we're strategic about it, it gives us 7 days to reach our community in very innovative ways. And it also gives us 7 days to better engage our current congregation. Because if we are now just a Sunday morning church, if we're now still going off of pre-pandemic expectations, I think we will lose a lot of possibilities in engaging new congregations or engaging new people in the community and engaging our current congregation as well. So this is really about developing that hybrid strategy. And next week, we're actually going to see how you go through the steps at developing that strategy. So last week I talked about 4 major shifts. Again, I'll hit this briefly, and then I want to talk to you about something I didn't talk about last week. So 4 major shifts I want you to think about as it relates to this new landscape of ministry. Is Sunday is a day, but it's no longer the day for ministry. Right? I want you to think about this. Ministry happens every single day of the week. So imagine if you reframed your church calendar. Imagine if you reframe. I would even say that preachers now, I'm not a professor of preaching, but I would say preachers now have to redefine their calendar in terms of, instead of looking at it with 52 weeks, is to start looking at how do you create engaging sermons 365 days of the year, right? Not the same sermon or a different sermon every week, but how do we create engaging content that reaches our community? How do we think about it in terms of 365 days as opposed to 52 Sunday? Right? Ministry happens every single day of the week. Your community has needs on Tuesday. They have critical questions on Thursdays. The world shuts down because of a global pandemic on a Wednesday. And how are we now responding to that outside of Sunday morning? So again, we're going to show you the process of how to do this. But think 365 days versus 52 weeks. Again, we're going through this pretty quickly. Number 2, who you are is more important than what you do. Right? What do you value as a congregation? Right? And I'm going to show you a quick clip in terms of value. Let me just stop here and I'll share my screen. I'm going to show you what it looks like for a congregation to be very clear about what they value. So I'm going to show you a clip that they showed in the Super Bowl And I'm going to show you what the world often does right and what the church often fails to do. So let me go here. Bring this up. And you all tell me if you can hear it once I start. Now, this doesn't look like a church, but you'll get the point. And let me know if you can hear it when I start. Just kind of give me a Don. Your face is on my screen, so give me a thumbs up if you can hear it. I think I've got Don, Deborah, and Sue on my screen. Those are the people I can see. So give me a thumbs up if you can hear it.
So when you say, let's grab a beer, it's never just about the beer.
Come on, I'm buying you a beer.
Okay.
What did they say?
Flight crews next door eating pizza.
It's how you say, I'm glad we're stuck together.
Here's the new friends. Lydia, we sure could use your help on this.
Or,
Okay.
you deserve to be here.
Congrats.
Or, I'm really sorry.
No, not yet.
It's a way to say, shake it off.
It wasn't that noticeable, was it? Yeah, only if you have ears.
So when we're back,
I can't do Friday. I got a date.
Why don't you bring her here?
let's remember, it's never just about the beer. It's about saying that simple human truth.
Come on, let's grab a beer.
We need each other.
Stop that. It was about the simple human truth. We need each other. So let's just have a quick conversation about that. Again, we're talking about the major shifts after the pandemic that is more about what we value and is more about who we are than what we do. I want you to talk to me about what you saw in the video. Talk to me about what you saw. Let's just have a small discussion for a few minutes. What'd you see?
People sharing.
You saw people sharing. Absolutely. Absolutely. That's good. What else did you see?
Recognizing the emotional state of others, and whether it's a moment of celebration or a moment of sharing in the depths of pain.
Absolutely. Oh, that's great. Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. Sharing in the depths of pain. What else?
Inclusion.
Inclusion. Okay. Tell me where you saw inclusion.
When the group was meeting and they invited her in and said, we need your input.
That's right. We need your input. Very good. Very good. Let's give me one more. What else did you see?
Well, I saw communication was key.
Communication was key. Give me more. Where'd you see the communication?
I think from the beginning, let's grab beer and you deserve to be here. It's more than beer. And so communication was very crucial in all that they were interacting.
Yeah. Now, watch this. So we talked about communication, inclusion, sharing in people's pain. This sounds like a church, doesn't it? But it was about beer. No, okay. So did they tell you how good the beer tastes?
Nope.
Did they tell you how many carbs that it had?
Nope.
Did they tell you about the cost?
Nope.
Where you could buy it? They told you nothing about the beer, but they showed you the value. They talked about the simple human truth of we need each other. Now, they didn't wait till Sunday morning during the sermon to talk to you about sharing each other's pain. Or they didn't wait till Sunday morning to talk about the value or the value of inclusion. They didn't wait till Sunday morning to talk to you about communication or the small groups or the church programs. With a 1-minute video, they shared a power human truth about inclusion, communication, sharing in pain, sharing in suffering, and they did it all under 1 minute. Right? Can you, right, how much time do we spend trying to communicate that same message week in and week out? And we put so much energy into it. I'm not suggesting that those things are not valuable, but I am suggesting that there are other tools that can be just as impactful, that can be just as important, that it doesn't have to be something high produced or high value, but there are other ways of showing and connecting with simple human truths, because that's what they did. They connected with a simple human truth outside of Sunday morning. And that's where I think the church has to do better at, because we are reaching a time where every church offers the same thing. At its core, they offer a sermon, song, small groups, and serving. But what sets your congregation apart? What do you value? And I think we're living in a culture that is more value driven, because during the pandemic, they had access to every church in America. They could listen to their favorite preacher, they could listen to their favorite choir, that they were no longer defined or limited by going to the church in their community. And what we started to realize was that churches that were very clear about who they were, and this is why messaging is so important, right? The same emphasis we put on the messaging on Sunday morning, what are you messaging to your community Monday through Saturday? Right? What do I spend so much time in sermons sometimes trying to think of the perfect transition and the perfect way to close and the perfect opening. I'm very intentional about the words that I use. And I think as we move in a post-COVID world and learning how to do churches being very clear about who they are, will have a better chance of reaching their community, because the people that they're serving are living in a value-driven culture. Does that make sense? So let me just stop right there and just ask, what other ways do you see this idea of our world being value-driven? How else do you see that displayed in your community or in culture?
Well, a lot of our political debate is around what you value. Sure.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And sometimes it might boil down to one thing, right? But what they are uplifting, right? And sometimes they won't even tell you. And this is kind of both. This is both sides, Republican, Democrat, no party, every party, right? What they're doing now, they won't even tell you sometimes the specifics about what they're going to do. They just tell you about values, right? A value-driven culture, right? And so depending on whether you agree with the values, is often sometimes how we choose our political leaders, right? For better or for worse, right? That is a great example. Give me one more example of how we see this lived out. Where else do you see this lived out? What other TV shows or commercials? Oh,
I was thinking about, I live in an area where there are a lot of country clubs, none of which I'm a member at, but there's a certain communication of who are the kind of people who join this club.
Yep.
Rather than, like you said, I like the point you made about, rather than talking about, well, this is the entrance fee, this is the amenity we have, this is how nice our locker room is, this is whatever. It's kind of, are you the kind of person who fits in well with us? Yeah,
that's right. So we're talking about 4 major shifts of how we change after COVID. I'm gonna share my screen just for a few more minutes, and then we'll kind of get into some different things, especially for those of you who are here the first time. Just kind of bear with me just for a few more moments. We talked about set times are obsolete in terms of normally we look at the majority of our faith happens between the hours of 8 and 12 on a Sunday morning. But I think our culture now has shifted so much after COVID that there is no such thing as set times. I mean, because we live in such an on-demand culture and this DVR culture where they have access to information 24/7. And so if I want to watch a Games of Thrones, I can watch it at my leisure. If I want to watch the new Marvel that just came out, right? I don't have to wait till Thursday at 8 o'clock. And if I miss it, I gotta wait till the rerun to come out. No, I have access to these things. And so the church now has to respond to this world that goes by easy accessibility. So the same way that your new Games of Thrones show is accessible 24/7, the church now has to be accessible 24/7. Not necessarily the building. Again, what do we believe about God, our capacity to change, and the church? But what does it now look like for the church to answer the critical questions about life and faith in a very easily accessible manner? So if you're trying to connect with your community in meaningful ways, how accessible are you outside of Sunday morning? And what I'm suggesting is that technology gives us a great way to now respond to this culture that is used to things that are very important to them to be accessible at all times. And number 4, by the means by which people stay connected has evolved. What people deem to be community has evolved. Your community is no longer just the people in your local community, but they are the people that share values. These are the people that might be in different parts of your state or different parts of the country. And that's why I want to encourage, regardless of what community you live in, you have an audience that is far beyond your zip code. And so, but I think if we start to think strategically about what some of those things are, I think we're better set to do this. Now, I didn't share this last week, but here's something that I think that has dramatically shifted, and which is why I think it sets sort of the framework for how we do this ministry in a hybrid context outside of Sunday morning. So I call this the playlist culture. And what I mean by a playlist culture is that, so there was a time growing up, and I had an older brother that was 9 years older than me. And he used to have something called records and 45s. So for those of you who are familiar with that, give me a hand raise if you know what I'm talking about, right? There were these kind of these cardboard
Sleeves.
Your sleeves, there you go. There were these sleeves, and he would put the records in, and then he would try to keep them really nice so they wouldn't have any scratches. He would put them on the record player, and they would have this little sound on it. But if you wanted to move to the next song, you had to like time it just right with the needle and the record. And if you went too far, you had to bring it back, but you could only listen to one record at a time. And then we went to CDs. And, now though, we're living at a time where people can choose their interest. So when there was a time when you wanted to buy, my brother had a Michael Jackson CD. It was the bad CD. But nowadays that people can have the Michael Jackson CD, the same playlist with Michael Jackson and country music and gospel music and whatever they decide, that now people have options. What I mean by we're living in a playlist culture is that the church is no longer the only option for a person seeking a community of faith or resources on developing their faith. Here's the reality. For most of the people that you are trying to reach and the people in your congregation, you are not their only option. You are an option, but when they're looking for community, the church is not the only place that they have to do that. If they're looking for information about getting out of debt and stewardship and relationships and marriage and parenting, the church is no longer their only option. So as we think about how do we provide value and how do we connect with people, is to now to understand that the church is one option. You're not only one option in terms of your local congregation, but remember, as I said before, that they have access to now every church in America. So they may come to you for one thing, and then they may go to another church for another thing. We still have so many people in our congregation that attend small groups at St. Luke's online, but they are still very present members in their local congregation. And so sometimes what we consider, here's why this is important, because what we consider to be church engagement has dramatically shifted. What we consider to be someone who's involved in the life of the church, a committed disciple of Jesus Christ, it has dramatically shifted. It has not only shifted our view of church engagement or involvement, but a singular voice of one preacher, I would say, is now obsolete. The singular voice of one preacher is now obsolete. They listen to you and they listen to many others. And because they're listening to many others, what would it look like now for the church to become a resource for good preaching, as opposed to just the only source of it? Does that make sense? What would it now look like for the church to become a resource for quality messages? And again, when I'm talking about sermons, I'm not just talking about the 25 to 30 minute expounding on a particular text, but a sermon. Oh, let me show you something real quick. I'm going to take a diversion just for 1 second, and I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you what this could look like. I'm going to show you what this could look like. Let me stop sharing, and I'm going to show you something we did for Holy Week. And I'm going to show you something we did for Holy Week. Share my screen, and then you can let me know if you can hear this. So I know that's a crazy picture that just timed out at the wrong spot. But we did this for Palm Sunday. We did this for Palm Sunday. I want you to take a look. It won't be long. It won't be long.
Who doesn't love a good celebration? Because on Palm Sunday, that's exactly what they were doing. They were having the time of their lives. I mean, they lined the road with palm branches to signify Jesus as their military savior. They thought he would overthrow the Roman Empire and set them free. And the palm branch had to become a sign of victory in their story of independence, and their shouts and their cheers signified what they had hoped and thought that they needed Jesus to be. And so often Jesus simply becomes a product of our own needs. In some cases, we will hold our devotion hostage based on God's ability to meet those needs and those needs. Jesus knows that this is the beginning of the end. There's no turning back from this. On this Palm Sunday, Jesus had to travel down a difficult road and make some difficult decisions. Let's be honest. Who doesn't like to have a good time? Who doesn't?
So that was just something short we did for Palm Sunday. Now we broke it up into 4 different parts. So that was just about a minute, but we broke it up into 4 different parts. But we did it on an iPhone, right? We did it on an iPhone, and we broke it up into 4 different parts. Our videographer was really busy at the time, and so we had to find a way to how do we, give a small message out about Palm Sunday in a very easy, non-threatening way. And so I think there are just some really great possibilities of us doing some innovative things that doesn't cost a lot of money, But I think, if we start to understand that if we're trying to be, because I think sometimes if the difficult part for churches is the first thing we go to is that we don't have the resources, or we don't have all of the people, we don't have the volunteers, we don't have a lot of the stuff to really do things outside of Sunday morning. And my response often is, you don't necessarily have to produce everything, but you may find some other local Presbyterian churches or some other voices that are valued in your community that have already produced it. And all you have to do is share it, right? And again, because your congregation no longer is defined by just a singular voice. So I think there's some potential and possibilities that as we think about reaching our community, and engaging our current congregation and reaching new communities, I think we can be really strategic about how we do that. And I think we can be really strategic about how we use things that are already there. So let me go to this question, and then I want to especially move on for the people who are new to us. So the central conversation that I'm asking each of you to really answer, and then we will flesh this out over the next 2 weeks, is how does your congregation add value to your audience 7 days a week? What are the critical questions and concerns for your community, for your target audience, right? What are the critical questions that they have? So here's what it means to add value 7 days a week. Now, I don't think I showed this last week, but here's what it means to add value. So if you look on the right where it says 52 Sundays, here's what it often looks like when we add value to Sunday morning. What it often looks like is we plan our calendars weekly. And as we plan our calendars weekly, we normally plan it for 52 Sundays of the year. So normally when I would go away and I would plan a preaching series, I would plan for 52 Sundays. And, taking away Christmas and Easter and all those other Sundays, my mind was thinking 52, and pretty much everything around the church calendar was built off of what happened on Sunday morning. So if the youth was doing something, if we were doing a big mission project, if we were doing a big stewardship campaign, a lot of that was geared off of what happened on Sunday morning. And a lot of that was driven by the sermon. And so, if we were preaching something around love during the month of February, we would schedule a lot of things around what the sermon was going to be on. So the preacher had to, get the sermon and the scriptures ready and early and give to other people. And then we would do projects, right? And so the goal began to be what happened on Sunday morning. And then we would measure how many people showed up on Sunday morning. But I want to challenge you to maybe think about planning differently post-COVID. Again, this relates to a hybrid model, because if you're thinking about how do we add value to our congregation 7 days of the week, that will push us to think more creatively about how we do that, where we do that, and when we do that. That doesn't always have to be in person. And I think we can do that effectively. And I think we can do that well and excellently without a whole lot of money. And I think we can do that strategically. So instead of thinking weekly, I'm challenging churches to think thematically. I'll give an example of what I mean by thematically. So I'm not saying that you don't add your weeks in there, but I'm saying is instead of starting with 52 Sundays, we now start with the critical questions that your community is having around life and faith. So I want to show you what this looks like. So, and again, you're going to practically do this next week. We're going to take these answers, and then you're going to develop a hybrid strategy for ministry and how you connect with your congregation outside of Sunday morning. So I want you to, I want each of you to choose 3 major concerns that are going on in the life of your congregation or in the life of your community that people are having. So they can either be concerns or questions, but I want you to go through the chat and type in 3 of those major concerns or questions that people in your congregation and community they have. I want you to type in 3. Let's see what we got. Just type in 3. We got time. It's no rush. If you got to think about it, that's okay. We're just building some foundation. So give me 3 major concerns that you think that people in your congregation have. Very good. Inflation. Very, very good. Education. Absolutely. Next generation not connecting to church. Great. How do we achieve social justice? Hey, now, are you noticing the differences in some of these answers? Right. This is really, really great. So how do we achieve the justice? Okay, give me a few more. Right. We're dying physically. How are the church going? Absolutely. This is really, really great. Really, really great. I'm going to take a couple of these and go through them. Not tech savvy, so isolated. So isolation, absolutely, huge one. Change in demographics of the neighborhood. This is really, really good. How do you address death and dying issues? Oh, these are phenomenal answers. Phenomenal answers. What is a step I can take to help my neighbors have a fulfilling life? So if you notice, these are not repetitive answers that you're looking at in your community and your congregation and thinking of how do we add value? How do we add value? Growth, cost, future generations, make belief system relevant to younger people. Can we support their faith? These are really great. So I'm going to keep talking and you all can keep putting them in the chat if you want. Now imagine aging congregation. This is really, really great. So here's where we start as a congregation, as a preacher, as content creators. Instead of starting with 52 weeks, we are now starting with answering the major questions and concerns that people have in our community about life and faith. Because what are we trying to do? We're trying to add value to our congregation 7 days a week. And here's how we do that. When we start with our critical concerns, I'm now not just thinking about what do I say on Sunday, but now I'm thinking about all of the other tools and technology I can use to now answer these questions and to answer these concerns. Because if I'm only thinking about Sunday, I have now limited the potential and possibility to speak to people and to answer them where they are. I give you a prime example of what I'm talking about. So let's just say I take the first answer. And for my community, it's really dealing with inflation. So I'm trying to think about how do I add value to this community? We've been talking about growing our church and growing our congregation, and the major concern that people is having might be around inflation and rising costs versus the steady income. But as the preacher, as the church, if I'm only preaching about it, I'm limiting that information only to the people who show up on Sunday. So now, even if I'm in a town of 3,000 people, if 85 people show up on Sunday, I've only added value to a very small percentage of the congregation. And that's just assuming everybody shows up on Sunday, right? So now my potential of adding value is very small. But now if I'm thinking 365 days, as opposed to just what I say on Sunday, now I can create a plan that strategically, maybe once every month, maybe first Fridays, maybe Wednesday devotions, maybe it's bringing in local community leaders, right? Now I'm tackling a major concern, and now I have all of these other avenues. Now I've got YouTube, I've got Facebook, I've got interviews, and we'll kind of go through some of these things. I've got blog articles I can do. I've got interviews. Now I started with inflation. And now I've mapped out a strategy of now adding value, because it's more than just about preaching a sermon. It's now the potential and possibility of literally reaching our community that may not have otherwise come into the church on Sunday morning into the building. But I've been able to add value to that because I'm now thinking in terms of using technology to add value 7 days of the week instead of just adding value on Sunday morning. So what does that do? That gives me steady momentum. That gives the preacher, that gives the content creator, that gives the congregation now the potential and possibility to hold on to that need for an extended period of time, as opposed to just the length of a sermon series. Now my resources are spread throughout. Now my resources are spread not just to Sunday morning, but now my resources are now being spread throughout the rest of the year and the rest of the days, because the goal now is not about who shows up on Sunday, but now the goal, if I'm thinking about 365 days, is getting people engaged, not only in the life of the congregation, but also getting people engaged in connection with each other and around engage with each other. So we've just taken one issue, and you're going to go through this in your own community next week. We've taken one issue about inflation, and we see how you can really create a strategy outside of Sunday morning. So here's really what technology will do, and this is why I invite all of you. Actually, let me move to here. And then I'm going to go back a little bit and go back to that last slide. Go back to this last slide. Let me just stop here for 1 second. And let me go back to this one slide. Because I want to pause and kind of see where you are technologically. And again, there's no judgment. There's no right or wrong. But I want to kind of see, where you are. So let me share my screen. So I break it down into 3 tiers. And then I'm going to go back. Did I go back? I'm going to just to kind of see where you are. So when people are trying to create value, and we went through some of the lists last week, but I want to go through it in a more detailed way this week as we go through the different options of how you can do that. So I want you to think about where you are as a congregation, and it has nothing to do with size. And I really want your feedback on this. So what I normally encourage people to do is to be honest about where you are, and honest about what you can do, and honest about how you can best reach your community. And the first place I tell people to start is what I call tier 1, right? Sometimes people will ask, we just don't know where to start. I tell them, here's an example of what a tier 1 could look like. And I'm going to give you what I think is somewhat debatable depending on what you can offer. So I encourage everyone now to at least have some kind of website. And what I mean by website, and if you're taking notes, write this down, is to have a value-based website. And I'm going to show you what a value-based website looks like. I'm not just talking about a website that is information-based. So a good way to do this A good way to tell if your website is information or value based. So what we did at St. Luke's is we had something called secret shoppers, and we actually paid people in our local community to visit our congregation, and we had them fill out a form about what they saw and what they experienced. But you can also do that through a hybrid model. So if you're trying to figure out where you are as a congregation, again, the size makes no difference whatsoever. But if you're trying to figure out, we have a congregation of 65 people, and we believe that we can reach to 85 people in the next 18 months. But we want to know what our community thinks about our congregation. Is what we would normally do is we have the secret shoppers. But we had the secret shoppers. We wouldn't tell them where the church was or what time the service started, but we would have them go online. So you can actually have the people in your community, or to go on your website and ask them, looking at our website, what would you say are our highest values as a congregation? What do you think we stand for? What are the things you think we value? And if you do that with 3 to 5 people, and you get that very conflicting values, that lets you know that there's a gap there. So I would encourage people to have a value-based website. And again, it does not matter. It does not matter the size of your congregation. But if you have a value-based website, you're now being intentional about words you're using. If you are words like inclusion or words like discipleship, right? And we're going to go in terms of how you filter that. But I would say a value-based website. And number 2, I invite people to at least commit to being on one online platform, because most of the people that you are trying to reach and a lot of the people in your local congregation are on some kind of social media. Again, even at St. Luke's, our most engaged people on Facebook are women over the age of 65. So this is not just to say that this is just for young people, but it is for your community and congregation. And here's what I would recommend too. Now, pastors always fight me on this. People always fight me on this. So I am ready to go toe to toe. So I always encourage pastors or key leaders, you must be active on social media. If you don't hear anything else I'm telling you, it is now. This is really. Let me give you a prime example. So, my pastor, even at St. Luke's, fights me on this all the time. I mean this in a jokingly way. The disagreement we always had. He is a really, really good preacher. A really, really good preacher. Is we're having some disagreement about the accessibility of the preacher and about how the preacher now gets his message out in the 21st century. And so when we were having the conversation, I had to remind him, I said, do you know that LeBron James is more accessible than you are? Right? LeBron James, who is, they now say, a billionaire and one of the most recognizable athletes in the world. You can literally talk to them on social. You can get inside of his personal life on social media. You can see what's going on in his life, right? And that's why I often encourage not only the pastors, but the churches, is for so many people out in the world, the gospel is no longer accessible. For a lot of people, the church is not accessible. But by us having an online presence that allows the people in our community to have a front door seat to peer inside of what's happening in the life of the church, to see what's happening in the lives of value. Someone say, how do I set up an account that is just for my personal life? Yes, that's a great question. That is a great question. So a great friend of mine by the name of Simeon Spencer, who actually graduated from Princeton, he has 2 Facebook accounts. He has one that's his personal account, and he has one that is his church account. And he controls that by the amount of friends that he accepts or that he doesn't accept. But what that does is that allows the church to be actively involved in the life of its community. And that involves the community to be actively involved in the life of the church. So I would recommend highly that the churches, or even pastors, if you say, hey, I just really can't do it, then have some of your key leaders get active on some social media platform. And I would even say for some of you, Sunday morning streaming does not have to be a necessity if you're doing the other things well Monday through Saturday. So let me just quickly go through 2 and 3. So again, I talked about the website value driven, some of the key things. I think at this point, if you're looking at tier 2, I encourage people to start production of outside content. And that could be something as simple as turning on an iPhone and doing something around Easter or Christmas or inflation, something around there where you're producing something outside of Sunday morning. And I think at this point, if the congregation wants to start doing Sunday morning streaming, but I also encourage people that in terms of the use of technology, to have some data management system. And here's why that I encourage people to have at this point in their ministry. If you're moving it towards a tier 2, you might say, hey, pastor, we're doing the Sunday morning service. We've got a website. We're on social media. Okay, then what does it look like for you to do step 2? Well, what does it look like for you to start producing outside content? And what does it look like to have a data management system? And the reason why I think this is so important is because if we're thinking about how to connect with people outside of Sunday morning, we can no longer rely on connection cards in order to keep track of the new people that we are trying to reach. So the same way that for a lot of us, when we ask people to come back to church on Sunday morning, we had them register. Just about every organization or entity now asks you to register for something. And I think finding ways where we can keep track of people to know who we are or to know who they are, I think is really important. And I would say lastly, in terms of your tiers, you will know some of these are the same, but we move from the data management system, and now the church is a resource hub for critical questions and consistently adding value. So the church moves from just a place that's just producing, but now the church becomes a resource hub. So with the person in the community wants to learn about inflation, the church can now speak into that. Again, they don't have to wait to Sunday morning to do it, but the church has now written articles about inflation. The church has maybe brought in someone from the local community to talk about inflation. The church has given out some resources about good stewardship. Local business owners to support. The church becomes a resource hub. And now your systems begin to align with your new demands. And I'll give you an example of what this looks like. So I'm now encouraging people who often preach. Is it intentionally produce things? Say that again. Example of outside content. An example. So I'm going to show you what outside content looks like right after this. I'm going to show you a website, and it's going to be a bunch of stuff, but I'm going to show you what this practically looks like to do something with outside content. So your systems start to align with meet new demands. Here's what I'm trying to really encourage preachers to do. Is I'm really trying to encourage preachers to think differently about their time. Because, and let me give an example of what this looks like. So with most preachers, we would spend sort of the week kind of working on the sermon. And I've somewhat encouraged preachers to do one or two things. Number one is to develop preaching teams. Is to now, instead of the solo preacher trying to determine things, is to start doing some things in groups. Because if you're trying to do blogs or articles or anything, having sort of input from people. So if we come down and say, let's look at our year together, Yeah, we're talking about things like inflation and doing different things. It's to have a preaching team, to talk about these things as a group, so that instead of preaching, 40 Sundays a year, maybe you preach 36. And then there might be some other possibilities of giving different voices, so that the preacher, the content creator, can maybe do some other innovative things that I think is still really, really powerful to do that. So I'm going to show you what some of this outside content looks like. Let me show you what some of this outside content looks like. Look, let me stop right there and just ask you if you have any general questions, and then I want to get into some specifics about how do you filter this. We're going to look at our target audience, and then I want to show you a website that does it so well. I don't want you to, it has all the bells and whistles, but I want to show you what an example of what some outside content can look like. So let me just stop right there and just ask if you have any questions so far. Okay, Bob, what's up?
I want to change your question a little bit for my context. You talked about how do you value the 7 days a week? I want to ask, we've got a fair number of people who value 1 hour a week, and that's what they're willing to commit. Are we really going to be able to move those people to a different level of commitment?
So think about it. Think about it like this. How many hours would you say that people in your congregation watch movies a week?
I have no idea.
Do you think they're watching movies more than 1 hour a week?
Well, probably, yeah.
Yeah, of course they do. How many hours would you say they read a week?
There are a lot of other activities they fill their time with, yeah.
Yeah. So what I'm suggesting is that the church. Let me give you a prime example. For the church that says, and I agree with you, because the rhythms of people have changed after COVID. The rhythms of people change. The amount of time they are willing to spend in a church building has just dramatically shifted. It's just dramatically, you open the doors, does not guarantee that people will come inside. The reason why I think it's so important to develop a strategy outside of Sunday morning is because the way that people receive information and get the answers to critical questions about life and faith have just dramatically changed. And so I give an example of what this looks like. So for the person that says, hey, they only come to church an hour a week. But what about if we did a blog series or a series of articles that really, let's say, you're in a community. Let's say, give me an example of a critical concern that your community has. Bob, give me just kind of shout one out for me.
Well, for us, I think one would be just changing demographics of who's in the neighborhood.
Oh, that's perfect. That's perfect. Perfect. Because I think a lot of people are going through that. So let's just say, for most people, if you look at Sunday mornings and look at the hour that they spend, most churches are limited because they're only thinking about how much can I fit into this hour. But now expand and say, man, I don't just have 1 hour anymore on one day. I can do this 7 days a week. And I can do this 7 days a week because it is now not determined or limited by them showing up on Sunday morning anymore. Now I can either do it by Zoom, right? Now I can do an interview. I can do an interview with the local council person about the changing demographics, and I can make it available on social media, and I can break it up into a 3-part series about the changing demographics, right? And so now they can access the information whenever they want to. Now I can do a live portion on Facebook and say, hey, on First Fridays, I want to bring in an interview a different person in our community that represents the changing demographics, and we'll talk about the things that they're going through, right? And so now these things become accessible to them, and you've been able to address some of these critical concerns, because what does the change in demographics do? Sometimes it affects housing, it affects schools, it affects so much. But now you got the whole year, right? This is what's so exciting. Now I got the whole year to tackle a very important topic in our community, and I don't have to limit it by that 1 hour on Sunday morning. So yes, maybe you are Sunday morning, 1 hour a week, but they do so many other things. But now, how do you now become active in the other things that they're doing, right? I mean, watch this, is there a popular movie about changing demographics that you can invite your congregation to watch? And then on First Fridays, we'll come and we'll have a discussion about it, right? I mean, how do you be involved in what they're already doing? Because it's not as though they go to church for 1 hour and then they go home and just sit and they're isolated for the other 23 hours. They're doing other things. But how does the church now get involved? Because remember, the gospel is about being present where people are, right? What do you believe about God? We believe that God is incarnational, right? We believe that God was made real, God was made flesh. How does the church now make the gospel become real and made flesh? It's not just by what we do on Sunday morning, but what we do for the rest of the week. So yes, I think we live in a world where they are 1 hour people, absolutely, but they are doing other things, and we can just be very strategic about, and a part of that is understanding your demographic, and we're going to kind of go through that after we look at this website, and that's why each of your digital strategies will be very different, is because each of your target audiences will be extremely different. So any more questions before we move on a bit? So let me show you a website. And again, I don't want you to get too thrown off, because even when I showed this to our team, they got really thrown off and they said, we can't do all of that. I said, no, you don't have to do all of that. So let me show you this website. I want to talk about a value. Again, don't look at the bells and whistles. I'll show you practical ways of doing this. Hold on one second. Not right now. Sorry, that was my 10-year-old asking me about Xbox. So let me show you this. All right, can each of you see this?
Yeah.
So this is this church called Crossroads. It's the church called Crossroads. I want you to pay attention to the wording. Now, I'm not saying that you got to go out and spend $1,000 on the website. I actually don't want you to do that. What I do want you to start being is intentional, and to see how we can be just as intentional about connecting with people outside of Sunday morning, and how our website becomes a tool for that. And it can be a simple website with simple templates, but the value of it is not going to be in the money you spend, but the intentionality about using the wording and being intentional about expressing the values that you want to reach people. Now, this church called Crossroads is this larger congregation, but I want you to look at the intentional things that they do. Right from the beginning, listen to what they say. You were born for adventure. You were born to make a difference, designed to partner with God to change the world for good. If it sounds like your type of adventure, Crossroads is your spiritual outfitter. Right? That's what they, bam, like this is, so what does it look like? So, and every congregation won't sound like this, and it shouldn't sound like this, but they're very clear about their values, right? What values do you see? Like making a difference and change and adventure and play and, exploration. It's about what they value. And I don't believe you don't have to be a large congregation to be clear about what you value. because this is a tool. Watch this. I can preach a sermon on Sunday morning about inviting you to go on a venture with Jesus Christ of discipleship, but I only got one day and I only got 25 to 30 minutes. But now I'm starting to be intentional about messaging and preaching and sending values right outside of Sunday morning. Remember, it's not about the beer. It's not about the beer. I'm expressing values. I'm adding value to my community 7 days a week. Now I want you to show you what some of these some of the outside content would be. And some of the easy way to do this, I love how they say watch, listen, or read. That's a great way to categorize your outside content. Is it something your community can watch? Is it something your community can listen to? Is it something your community can read? And you don't have to be a large congregation to produce something your community can read. You don't have to have a large congregation to create a podcast of just your sermons. It doesn't take a large congregation to sit down with a local community leader and record it in audio and then just put it out there on YouTube for the world to listen to. It costs absolutely nothing, right? So I want you to kind of see what this looks like. So I want you to just look at their articles, right? I want you to just look at the articles that they have. And this is one of the examples of outside content, because sometimes people think I don't have the videographers or the production quality. Doesn't have to do that, right? Look at some of the things that they have. Taking the stand in the felony trial, how to heal from parental abuse. If Jesus had a 9 to 5, right? Make it a good fight. How to Sabbath the best day of your week. Finding the Jesus that fits you. Is my kid ready for baptism? Let's talk about Bruno, right? Let's just click on that one. Now, are you all able to see me when I scroll? Right, yeah, right. So this is just somebody that that's probably going through. They've taken a popular Disney something and they've probably wrote an article about the differences in family dynamics. You don't have to have a large budget to do that. But what am I doing? I'm adding value to my community outside of Sunday morning. Now, could I preach a sermon about this? Absolutely. But what happens when I preach a sermon about it? When I preach a sermon about it, it happens for 20 minutes and you only can get it on Sunday. But now we're here on September the 15th at 7:57, and now I can access it. Right now I can access the information that connects with my community, right, Bob, for the person that we can only get for 1 hour. Man, but now I'm actively involved in their lives and where they are. Yeah, I can send this out through a monthly newsletter or monthly email list. Hey, watch out for First Fridays and with our new blog, right? Maybe these are not high quality produced things, but they're very accessible. And let me show you something that they do with interviews, because I think this is something people can do very easily. Something that they can do with an iPhone, and you turn it on and you press live, and now you got people who are watching. So let me see if I can find their interviews. Let me see. It sounds like. Yeah, so outside content, Chip, can either be something that is produced by other people or it can be produced by you. So for some of I'll give an example. For some of the articles, the preacher might, let's say for the month of February, we're talking about love. And maybe the preacher is preaching about love. And then, if we're connecting in our preaching teams and we say, hey, we got 2 writers in our congregation, and they'll take the sermon, You know, they'll take the sermon after Sunday and they'll look at the manuscript or listen to it, and they'll write some really good articles about love. You know, what I mean by the outside content is really outside of Sunday morning. And I think that that's our really great potential to reach people, because Sunday morning, if our best stuff is only on Sunday, it's really limited by the people who are in the building. And so, but I think if we're strategic about how we do that, I think it gives us a greater potential and possibility to do that. So I want to just go here for 1 second. I think it's under, I think it's under videos. Let's see. Oh, here it is. Now watch this. They had, again, it's a large church, but just what they did. They have a series called Ask an Expert. And they have certain things like ask an expert about money, ask an expert about relationships, ask an expert about sex, right? And all they did was sit down with somebody for probably 35 minutes, and they just broke it up into a lot of different sessions. And so now this becomes a 10-part series and something people can access pretty much all year long when the church has questions about sex, you know, and it's about adding value outside of Sunday morning. Now, I could preach a sermon about it, or we could invite other people in the community to have some of these conversations. Now, I want you to look at this. I hope this doesn't bother you. This is just real, right? Listen to some of the conversations that they're having, right? How to start a conversation about sex, how to deal with ED or sexual pain, talking about sexual fantasies, rekindling your sex life after kids, right? These are probably normal conversations that their target demographic is having, but they've decided as a church, how about we facilitate those conversations? How about we add value to the church and our community, right? That, you know, they have things, ask an expert about mental health, ask an expert about money. I mean, they've done just some phenomenal things about adding value to their congregation. Again, this doesn't cost a lot of money, but I think it does add, a lot of value. So let me just stop right there. There are 2 more sections I want to go through, and then we'll have some question. We'll save about 15 minutes left over for question and answers. So let me just stop right there and ask any questions. Let's sort of have some feedback. And then I want to go over with you target audience, and then even sort of some, how we measure all of this. So I think Scott's got his hands up. Go ahead, man.
A burden falls on the pastor and also on the members of the congregation to motivate one another to invest the time that you're talking about, the time necessary to listen to the video, watch the video, or in the case of social justice, to invest the time at places outside of church and at times outside of Sunday morning, to behave in ways that exemplify discipleship, however you want to define that. And so I guess what I would see as being important is figuring out ways for the pastor and the members of the congregation to encourage one another to do more once we step outside of the church after church service on Sunday and re-enter the world.
Mm-hmm. I think that's absolutely great. I think, if you're writing notes, that last line you said, re-entering the world, I think is very powerful, because what technology does is that it allows the church to be actively present in the world 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It allows the church to speak into and to be present in the life of the community and speak into certain things at all times. Even give an example, something simple. Let's just take a social justice issue, right? Whatever social justice issue in your community. The church now doesn't have to wait to Sunday morning to say, here's what we believe about this social justice issue. Is that you can give out a small message every single day, reminding people about our call to social justice. We're telling people how they can live it out, giving a space where people can ask questions, giving a space for healthy dialogue. It is a way to do that 24/7, because again, we're talking about, not just Sundays, because now you're helping people to be, again, what do we believe about God? We believe about God, that God is incarnate, right? That God was made flesh. God was made real in the lives of people. And so I think we just have to be strategic, Scott, about how we do that. And I think having a hybrid strategy, not how we talk to people about social justice one day of the week for 1 hour, but how do we help people live this out every day of the week? There might be other, and this is the thing too, man, so much stuff, whether, you can do book clubs throughout your community, that the church is sponsoring. There's certain already articles that people are doing or conversations, and so now, the congregation that has 60 people, let's say a local social justice issue is care for the environment. Now the church of 60 people can become a resource hub for its community about caring for the environment, and they don't have to do that on Sunday morning, and they can really enter into that world 24/7, Scott. Absolutely. Any more questions?
I had a thought about what Scott said too,
Yeah.
Yvonne. Scott, I like what you said because it kind of highlights the opportunity to help members of the church think about themselves as producers of church rather than consumers of church.
Great.
And I think most people at our churches think about themselves as consumers of church. And so the opportunity to produce this outside contact or outside thing, to write a blog post, write a poem, write, whatever, gives people a chance to be producers of church and invites them in that way, that that is a shift in thinking.
Right. Yes, it is. It's great, Chip. It's great. It's great. So I want to show you, and next week we're going to start off with this. I'm going to go through very high level, and then next week I'm actually going to have you answer some of these things, because next week will be more so of a workshop and looking at things what we can measure. But I think what's very key is churches being able to identify their audience. And what that will help you do is it will help you filter whatever themes, whatever programs, whatever social media platform, whatever thing that you decide to do. Your target audience will really help you to do that. So let me go over this one part. So I think some of you are just joining us this week. So let me just go through this briefly. I'll try to do this in about 3 minutes, and then I want to go through the target audience piece. So we talked to the group about last week about the different options they can have about some of the things that they produce. And I just want to go over that briefly for those of you who are here this week. We just looked at at a few different ways that I think people who are sort of just starting can really do. And we looked at just a few things in terms of short videos or clips. Preferably now they're asking, for a minute or less. Webinars, how-to videos, articles, blogs, interviews, repurposed content. I always encourage churches and church leaders and pastors, don't feel like that you have a shelf life of 1 week on your content that you produce. That if you produce something last year for 9/11, Don't think you can't repurpose some of that same content for this year. It is a way of using what you've already produced. You did something 3 years ago, or you did something 6 months ago, and now you want to just take a small clip of that and put it out online. Hey, great, do that. I encourage people to repurpose as much content as they want. I mean, people watch reruns all day long, and they watch their favorite TV shows. It's almost nostalgic in some ways. Well, if it's, and also it's not the same people that's watching it over. You also have new people and new people in your community. So always encourage people, if you want to know where to start, start with repurposing something, whether if it's repurposing your sermon manuscript into different questions. There's so many possibilities to do that. Or there's live portions where you just hit live on whatever device you have, and you can, you're right there in your community now. It's real time. Podcast audios, people think that's really hard to do. It's not. I'm not a very technically savvy person, but we got my wife doing a podcast, and for some of it, it was literally buying a microphone and a computer and hitting record, and it turned out really well. And we also looked at just music videos, not necessarily music videos that you might produce, but man, you might find something online that really connects. Says, hey, we don't have a great choir. Well, there are great choirs throughout the nation, that are constantly putting their stuff out. Doesn't mean you can't use some of their stuff to do that. So I want to use that as we look at different ways. Let me stop sharing and just show you just one thing about target audience that I think is really important, because this will determine a lot of what you do. This will determine a lot of what you do. And next week, I really want you to start answering. I want you to start answering some of these things, because I think it will help us. So let me just share this screen with you. Target audience, here we go. Zoom and share screen. So this might be one of the most important questions for you. This might be one of the most important questions for you as you're looking at how do you connect with more people in your community. What I want to tell you is that as you're developing a hybrid strategy for ministry, you cannot go around this question. You can't. There's just no way that I can tell you that you can do this effectively and you not be able to articulate this. I actually haven't. I have not seen a church yet that is, again, size makes no difference. I haven't seen a church who's doing this well and they haven't been able to articulate this question. And that's really is, who is God calling you to reach? And you can't say everybody. That's why God has so many churches, because every church has a niche, a community, a feel, a personality, a value, and you got to decide who you believe God has called. Now, that doesn't mean that you won't reach a lot of people outside of that. But what it does is it gives you a filter. It gives you, for instance, at St. Luke's, we said our target demographic was between the age of 30 and 45. Someone who had some experience with church. They had degrees of higher education. They were middle to upper middle class. They had a family, and they had lived in our local community for at least 4 to 5 years. So again, and they valued social justice. So that was our target demographic. And so what I want you to begin to answer, because next week we're going to actually help you create a strategy and how you go through the practical steps of doing that. So by the end of our time next week, you'll come out with a document that will help you develop this sort of a hybrid strategy for ministry to connecting with people outside of Sunday morning. So a couple questions that will help you sort of define this is, who is naturally drawn to your ministry? who was naturally drawn to your congregation. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's your target audience, but it might present you an answer with a gap. So I give you a prime example. So we looked at our community and said the largest demographic was that demographic between the age of 30 and 45, but we realized that the person who was mostly drawn to our ministry was really church individuals over the age of 60. So we realized that there was a gap. We realized there was a gap between the people who were naturally drawn to us and the people who were moving into our community. There was a huge gap there. And so then you ask things like, what do they value? So again, this is why we start with a value-driven congregation, because sometimes the reason why I think churches are not necessarily reaching their community is not because of a lack of programs, it's because of a gap in values. Because remember, the very first place that people in your community will interact with you is where? It's online. And so long before they've showed up to Sunday morning, they've done some kind of search to see what you're like online. And that's why I often encourage churches to be value driven in their online presence. I mean, when they look on Facebook, when they look at these different things, and if we're not in these things, I mean, that's making a value judgment as well. And so, when you think about your target audience, what are the things do they value? Do they value politics? Do they value social justice issues? Do they value creation care? Do they value family? Do they value money? Do they, what are the things do they value? I often ask people to begin to articulate what's already working. So when you think about your congregation, right, what's not just where the gaps are, but what's already working for you. And then what's really critical is what are the major questions they have about life and faith. So when you start to think about that target audience, don't think about what you want to say to them. Don't think about what the church has to say to them, for the individual who's 30 to 45. No, we want to, don't start thinking about how to get them back into church. No. Start thinking about what are the major questions they have about life and faith, right? Do they have questions about money, about relationships, about empty nesting? What are their major concerns? And then this may take some research. Who or what are their voices of authority? For some, it might be the church. Is it, we realize that for a lot of our community between the age and 45, there were two things that were really well known with that demographic. And it actually changed some of our programming. Number one was the Enneagram. How many of you have heard of the Enneagram, right? We realized on that demographic, man, they were in love with the Enneagram. Like they chose like jobs based off of Enneagram. They would choose spouses and dates. Like I'm not dating a 9, I'm dating a 4. I mean, there's so much of their conversations was around Enneagrams. And then we realized that there was a sort of an author or data analyst psychologist by the name of Brene Brown that they absolutely loved. And so actually for one sermon series during the week, we would repost small YouTube clips of Brene Brown. I mean, it doesn't say, why do we have to recreate the material? But we were trying to reach a demographic. And so we realized that it would be a great idea to start using some of their voices of authority that they were already listening to, right? They were already listening to. So here's what this does, and then we will close tonight. We'll have a time of question and answer, and then we will close on tonight. So let me bring up the slide. I call it Hidden Gems, and then we'll close with question and answer. So here's what being present and having a digital strategy looks like. Hey, Sue, thanks a lot for for joining us. But we'll see you next week, and we'll start working on that strategy. I want to just give you 4 things that I think, by us adding value outside of Sunday morning, what it does to this to the community we are trying to reach, and what it does to our congregation. Number 1, it establishes authority, right? Why should they listen to your congregation? So when we are actively involved in the same congregations that are happening in the world and that are important to our congregation, it establishes us as some sort of authority figure within the congregation or within culture as well. And sometimes when people say that the church is irrelevant, what they're trying to say is that we no longer have positioned ourselves as a voice of authority in their lives. So when it comes to money, sex, and relationships, they say we're irrelevant because they found other voices. But I think social media and just being present online, it gives you a great way to reestablish yourself as a voice of authority in the life of your community and the congregation, right? Because what does it do? It demonstrates relevance, because the churches want to know, do you even have a clue? So for the church of 60 people that's trying to grow to 70, and you're trying to reach out to your community, right? They before they ever walk into your building, they'll look at your online presence, and they want, like, do you have a clue about what goes on in their life? Now, can you imagine if the 30 to 45-year-old professional person you're trying to reach, and they see you on Facebook and you have a quote from Brene Brown? It says something to them. Or you have a question about the Enneagram, or you're trying to reach a congregation of seniors, and now you got a question about how to dream in your golden years, right? Man, now this church gets it, right? And long before they've ever stepped foot in your doors. So when you've established authority and you've demonstrated relevance, what you're doing is you're building trust. You're building trust that when they have concerns or questions about life and faith, you now become a viable option for them to listen to. And your congregation and your community of faith becomes a viable option for them to live out their faith as well. And it starts the critical conversation of, do you care at all about what's going on in their lives? And watch this. You've been able to do all of that. You've established authority. You've told your congregation that you are relevant. You're building trust. You care about them. And you've done all of that for free outside of your sermon on Sunday morning. So listen, let me stop there. And let's just close with just some comments or questions, and we'll just spend the last few minutes. Want to honor your time as well. Thank you all for being present, representing your different congregations of faith communities, and feedback, questions, or comments, and we'll see what we have. So what do you think? Give me some feedback. What do you think? You buy it, or you totally say you're going to just turn on Brene Brown and listen to what she got to say? Go ahead, Bob. What you got?
Well, I think I'm going to suggest to Chip that in his sermon series that he does, we need to perhaps get a set on how you get beyond the Revised Common Lectionary. Yeah. My sense, Javon, is you haven't looked at the Revised Common Lectionary in a long time.
Okay.
And that's not a criticism. That's maybe a compliment. I don't know.
I have not looked at the Revised Common Lectionary in a while. I have not.
Javon, one thing that strikes me is that a lot of what you're talking about, I understand that it is easy technologically, but I have no idea how to do. I couldn't. I could record a sermon. I don't know how to break it up into pieces, for instance. I'm wondering. It seems like what I would probably do is talk to one of my friends who is 22 and say, who do
Yep.
you know that can help me break my sermon into little pieces? And they will know people who can do that and would be glad to do that. Do you have strategies for us who
An
don't
iPhone.
know about
Yeah.
this tech stuff?
If you have anybody with an iPhone, that's what we do all of our stuff on. We have an iPhone, and I think we use iMovie, which is an app on your phone, and it comes right up, and you move it to where it literally takes about 3 minutes, and you move it to what you want to show, and you press finish, and then there's your clip. It's very simple and easy to do. And again, it doesn't have to be a clip. And you can choose however which way you want to do it. And I think the good thing about technologically, which I want to encourage people, is even if you don't know, and let me tell you, nobody really knew how to do all this stuff. But what they started to do was to ask questions, and now you have resources with people in different congregations or communities who are doing this stuff. And sometimes it's a phone call, it's an email, it's sometimes it's a reinvestment in funds. But I think certain things like that, I always encourage pastors and leaders. You don't have to know how to do it. You just have to have a vision for it, and then to know who to talk to. And that's what I encourage people. Because some pastors, you're doing so many other things. You don't have to know how to cut a sermon. You just have to meet somebody and ask them to say, I need my sermon cut. Who do I need to talk to? Our pastor has no clue. Our pastor is not on social media. He does not have a Facebook account, an Instagram account. He does not know how to cut any of that stuff. But he knows it needs cut. And so a few of us have learned how to cut, and that's, and I think that's what we do.
I guess I'm thinking for congregations that are mostly older people, probably maybe nobody in the congregation knows, but their grandchildren will know.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah,
I was gonna say that.
They most certainly will.
Yeah.
They most certainly will. And again, and the way this works now, their grandchildren can be at school somewhere in Idaho, and you do a Zoom session, and you say, hey, can we send you something once a month, and can you cut it for us? Absolutely. And you give them a small stipend that they can go out and party with, and then you've built a volunteer in Idaho. These things are for older congregations. You've got people in your community and grandchildren who do this stuff so easy. So easy.
Yvonne, that's my question. What do you do with an older congregation that the members are not really enthused about Zoom meetings and Zoom Bible studies and other outreach in terms of social media?
Well, I think we're reaching a point where people are sometimes might be zoomed out. And so I would say you have to really pay attention. We always call it exegeting your context. And I would say for congregations and leaders, you got to do the same thing, not only with your people, but with your community as well. And so I think you got to start meeting people where they are. Hey, Michael, it was great to see you. And next week we'll get you going with your digital strategy as well. And so I think it's okay for sometimes for people to be zoomed out. But I want you to think about this in two ways. Is there some things that your congregation might be zoomed out, but what about your target audience? So again, we're starting with your target audience. So where's your target audience meeting? All right, are they zoomed out? Are they social media'd out? I just looked, and I can't remember the guy. Elon Musk was trying to buy, was it
Twitter?
Yeah, Twitter for billions of dollars. Can you imagine that? Billions of dollars, because that's where billions of people are at. you know. And so if this now, and this is amazing, you know, Twitter does not cost, and you only do a small number of characters. And so if Elon Musk has figured out this is $1 billion, you know, industry that is literally reaching billions of people across the globe and the world, you know, what does it look like for the church to see those same potential and possibilities? You might say, hey, none of our congregation is on Twitter. I'm not saying you have to do Twitter. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that we have to start exegeting our context. You exegete your congregation, you exegete your community, and then you base your things off of that. And sometimes it just has to be for a season. Sometimes you might have people who are zoomed out for a season, you know, but that doesn't mean in 6 months they'll be zoomed out, you know. It doesn't mean in 6 months that you won't have other means of connecting with them. But I think it is really important for the preacher and for the leaders to make sure that they're always reimagining and revisioning about what connection and community looks like within that context. So it might not be Zoom, but they're meeting somehow. You know, they're meeting somewhere. They're finding connection some way. Yeah, it might not be Zoom, but they're guarantee you they are meeting some way. They're meeting dates, they are meeting their grandchildren, they're meeting their friends, they are connecting in some way. It might be email, it might be text messaging, it might be a weekly text messages to people, hey, we love you, or something or another. You know, that's another means of technology. You know, everybody has one of these things that they use. You know, hey, we're starting a campaign. If you want a weekly devotion on Monday mornings to help you get started on your week, let us know. You know, didn't cost us anything.
Thank you.
I got muted. I wanted to thank you, Javon, so much for your time tonight. And I learned a lot. I'm sitting here thinking about the Synod website and ways that we can improve it based on what you were saying. I'm thinking about, gosh, we probably ought to be on Twitter more regularly. So thank you very, very much. I'm sure for everyone, it's been a really fruitful time. Great. And I saw several people, and I checked an email even while I was gone saying, hey, will this be on? Will this be online? Will this session be online too? So there's a lot of demand for it, even though we're a few members here, but I think it's going to get a lot of play afterwards. As I told you, Javon, it's not just Sundays, but it's not just Thursday nights either.
That's right.
So people can watch this when they can. So I want to thank you. Let's give Javon some happy hands and thank him very much for his time.
Thank you so much.
We will see you next week. Let me close this in prayer and we'll see you next week. Gracious God, thank you for all the means you give us to help others experience the life in you that you want for them. God, help our churches to think expansively and energetically about this. And we pray, oh God, that we who are leaders would listen to you as we move in new directions. Thank you, God, for Javon's expertise. And we pray in Christ's name. Amen.
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 Thank you, everybody.
See you all next week. Be ready to work. Be ready to work. We're going to go through some workshop stuff. So I'm excited about it.
All right. Thank you very much.